Alright, so this is officially the first time that I'm using my Hero 4 other than just like screwing around with it to figure out all the new features and stuff like that. So far I definitely like the fact that 4K is actually usable now. It's not just a fucking selling point. And a lot of people are like, well, why do I need 4K? I don't have a 4K monitor. It takes up a lot more memory. It's like, it takes for fucking ever to upload something in 4K. Nobody has 4K monitors to watch my videos on, so why would I shoot in 4K? Well, and a lot of people still use 1080, that's true. Oh, there's a fox. People still use 1080, that's true. Anyways, yes, 1080 is going to probably be the prime definition for a while. But there's this thing called downsampling. And what that means is 4K is literally you can fit 4 1080 screens inside of a 4K screen, basically. That's just the most simplified way of explaining it. So you can fit 4 1080s and 1 4K, so that means that the computer, when it downsamples, it takes 4 pixels, surveys the information in each pixel, and then averages them all out, and then turns them into 1. So you turn 4K basically into 1080. What the downsampling does is the images end up turning out a lot sharper. I believe there's a lot behind it, but I believe the biggest reason is just because of compression. When you record in 1080, the camera is trying to remove as much information as possible to make that file as small as possible. It's basically just like image compression, except it's in video format. So in video has a lot more frames. Right now I'm shooting at 24p, so that's like taking 24 like 0.3 megapixel pictures per second. So anyways, it's a fully capable 4K camera now. I'm currently shooting in 4K because I want to try the new downsampling method on it. So a little disappointment with it is, well, now 4K can literally do twice as many frames per second, so everything should do twice as many frames per second. And that's true with 1080p too. Now you can do 120 frames per second. But I was fully expecting 720p to do 240 frames per second. That would have been just fucking awesome, because you can only do that, you can still only do that in 480p. So that's just a little disappointment. Hopefully they fix it with a little bit of software update and they just don't like leave it for like the 4 Plus, which would be fucking stupid. So that's a little disappointment. I do like the idea of the wrong gear. I do like the idea of the new night time lapse. I think that's fucking awesome. Now you can expose single stills up to 30 seconds, but the one downside is that it'll let you expose an individual image for 30 seconds, but the time lapse has to be 60 seconds in between images or more. You can't have it exposed for 30 seconds, shutter closes, opens right away. It's got to close for 30 more seconds. You have to start at 60-second intervals, which isn't a biggie, but it just kind of makes you wonder, like, why couldn't you just do that? I'd never had the 3 Plus, so the 3 Plus introduced the Super View, and I already like the idea of the Super View. I haven't tested it on my helmet yet, so you might actually be able to see my mounting system before. It's mounted exactly like how my 3 was mounted. So you might be able to see one of the thumb knobs on there. So I might have to change up my entire mounting system just to make the Hero 4 to work with the Super View, because I'm definitely going to use the Super View. I think it's fucking awesome. Man, I had a lot of stuff I wanted to like touch on, but I just can't remember anything right now. Whoop. So yeah, those are obviously the biggest things I recognize because they're the only ones I can remember right now. I did look into the memory cards. UHS 1 is still the fastest card you can get for micro SD. So just because of that fact, I don't think this camera is going to have a problem with UHS 1. I think it can still support the camera write speed. Hopefully GoPro didn't like push the frame rate too high and realize that technology doesn't exist to write to it and lower or raise the compression ratio. But I don't know. One thing that I really like is that it has a lot more, I wouldn't call it professional, but nitpicky features to it. Like now you can go into Pro Tune, and like before you could choose your color balance. I like to use 5500 Kelvin because that's just about right in the middle. I can work around everything. But now with Pro Tune before, it was kind of like it just oversaturated everything, over sharpened everything, over contrasted everything just to make it look cool. But then you can never work with it later in post. So now they added a flat feature to Pro Tune, which doesn't raise contrast, doesn't raise the saturation, doesn't raise the sharpness. Actually, sharpness has its own individual setting. So yeah, I really like that. Now you can also individually set the sharpness to low, medium, and high. So right now I'm doing high. I'm probably gonna regret it because I don't like the high sharpness because it almost gives it like that HDR effect, which is fucking ugly. So yeah. Oh yeah, and they also brag so much about the external microphones. So I think I was just talking that whole time. I still have the USB dongle in, and I just remembered how the USB dongle like inside my helmet. Neutral. I have the exposure on +1 right now because I like for videos a little bit overexposed. Catches your eyes a little bit more. Let me get off of it. So I'll do a pan 4K super view. And then here's a pan of just 1080p. Super view. So I'll do a pan 4K super view. And then here's a pan of just 1080p in super view. So my battery is just about up. It's getting kind of dark outside. Not really. That shouldn't be a problem with this camera apparently. Supposedly it has even better low light performance. It goes up to ISO 6400 I want to say, just because that's what's in the settings. And that was also another professional setting that was in the camera is you can't set the ISO, but you can, it's always going to be in auto, but you can set how high the ISO can go. So you can set it at like, I think for photos at 100, 200, 400, and 800. And for video, you can get away with noise a little bit more on video, or you can sacrifice for noise if you want, if you just got to get that video. You can set the max ISO at 400. I want to say 800 and like 1600 and 6400. Like I don't know, I think there's only 3 choices, but it's a pretty big jump. But Jesus, 6400 ISO, especially if you're just running at 24 frames per second. I mean, that soaks in a lot of light. And I believe the aperture on this is relatively large too. The pixel size also matters, not the megapixels, but like the physical size of the light receiving pixel also depends immensely on how well the light soaks in. Oh, it's a full moon night. Didn't even realize that. So I wish my window had like an interesting enough view to where I could test the nighttime lapse, because that would be awesome if I could fucking take a time lapse of like the moon rising. There's also this website called Darksite if you really want to get into the nighttime lapses. I don't know the exact web or URL. Just Google like Darksite and then look that up, and it brings up like a Google map with an overlay that shows the whole United States and all the light pollution in the areas, so you can find a spot that you could actually see the Milky Way galaxy and all the stars and stuff like that. So that's really cool. There's one just on the outskirts of the Badlands where the dark zone like begins, but it's not like the darkest of the maps. And there's one about 30 minutes to an hour away from here that's like as dark as it gets on the map, which is actually pretty cool. So I might have to go there someday and do a nighttime lapse. Only problem is I would have to make it an overnight trip and like camp out there or something like that to make it worth my time, because I'm gonna want to do it from like sunset to sunrise. Now the only gripe I have about 4K is I've got like 2 years ago when I built my computer, it had all of the best consumer grade components. And what I mean by that, I mean like I'm not a fucking idiot. I didn't go out and buy server processors and graphic cards and stuff like that. I'm not one of the dumbasses that bought a fucking Titan to game with when you could have got something much cheaper and better for gaming. So at the time it was like the best, but it still struggles a little bit with 4K. I mean, at least with Photoshop and the GoPro Cine Studio, it's had a hard time. But I've been testing out, I think it's Cyberlink. So far I like it. It's really light, and it also, unlike anything else I've used, it uses the graphics card to boost like the rendering speed and all that. And actually, if I don't use the graphics card to render, it'll fuck up the video once it's done. So that's kind of weird. So this will be my first experience messing with 4K on that program. And this pretty much sums up the ride. So